Hey guys, it's Heather from Here She Grows, and I'm really excited to do this project. I love Staghorn Fern. I have a small one in my kitchen that I bought from Pissel's nursery several years ago, and it's growing like crazy, super happy, and it's mounted on a piece of cork. And all they used was sphagnum moss, a piece of cork, and some fishing wire, and they wrapped it on there. And if you're familiar with Staghorn Fern, or maybe you're not, but Staghorn Ferns are epiphytic. So they don't need a root system. What they do is they grow on other plants. They're not parasitic, they're epiphytic, so they're not taking nutrients from the plant that they're growing on. They are taking nutrients out of the air and just using, it's a symbiotic relationship. So they're just using whatever it is they're growing on, trees. In this case, it'll be a cutting board. So I wanted to do something really neat. I didn't want to just go buy any old plank of wood, which would have been fine. It would have stuck to that too. However, I thought a really pretty cutting board would be really nice. And I'm redoing our bedroom, so I wanted this as a decoration on one of our walls. Our bedroom's very bright, south facing, so I went over to Homegoods and I picked this up for 10 bucks. So all you need is a piece of wood. That is the surface. So they do need a little help growing on, so I'll have to anchor this onto my cutting board. So all I've got is the cutting board, some sphagnum moss that I've already pre-moistened. I've got some drywall screws, a drill that I've already put a flag on so I know how deep I want this to go for my pilot holes, because when you're putting screws into a piece of wood, if you don't do pilot holes, you can split the wood, and I want to make sure I don't do that. And then the star of the show, look at this. Look at that Staghorn Fern. Isn't that, oh, it's so beautiful. I love this plant. So like I said, the one that's growing in my kitchen is super easy to grow. I just dunk it every week, if I remember. Make sure I spray it down. I missed it when I remember that too, and it has carried on for the last 3 years. And I do have some issues with, sometimes it dries out because it's in a very hot window. So if I forget to water or spray it, the tips of those frond tips will brown out, and I just, once they start browning and yellowing, I just cut them out. I just have to make sure I'm conscientious of watering, especially as we're getting closer to spring is here and we're going to get into summer and it's going to get really hot. So I really do stay on top of watering, and I just kind of forgot to do it these last couple of days. But getting started, I just started with some pilot holes. So I am going to use 4 screws. Now I've seen it done where you can make a series of screws in a circle here and just put the screws in, and then you would anchor it using those anchor screws here. But instead, I decided to, I've already got a pilot hole done here, and I'm going to do one here, and then I've also done pilot holes in the side. So I'm only going to use 4 screws. Forgot to mention too that I also have some orchid potting bark, so that's also going to go at the base of this. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish up with the pilot holes first so that I'm not going to split the wood. And the reason why I put the flag on this is because I want to make sure that I don't go all the way through the wood, because I don't want the tips of my screws going through this and coming out the back of the board. You could also use nails to do this, but when you have a bigger staghorn like this, well, actually no matter what size, if it's too heavy, those screws or those nails can pull out. So I want to make sure that it's anchored in there and it's nice and firm, so screws are the way to do it. I'm just using drywall screws. It's what I had. Now that I've got the holes done, I'm going to set this aside and start separating my staghorn from the container. If you're looking for something to mix soil in, what I'm using here is a cement mixing tray from Home Depot for $7. So I mix all of my soils in here. I prepare my seed starting mix in here. Everything's done in here. I dump compost in here from my compost bin to distribute throughout my garden. So I have a couple of these around the house that I use for those soil purposes. It's also a great catch for when you're doing projects like this, and it doesn't cost you a fortune because there are so many soil containers out there that are way too expensive, and $7 is not going to break the bank, and it's a really nice affordable tool to use, and I use it all the time. Let me just get this hanger off. Okay. I don't need all of this soil. I just want to make sure that I'm not going to damage the plant. And this is a big plant. I ended up calling, if you're from the area, from the Chicago area, and maybe you live near Lemont, I'm a hop, skip, and a jump from Lemont, Illinois. And there's a shop in Lemont, Illinois called Aster Gardens. So if you're familiar with the book written by, it's called Kiss My Aster, it's by Amanda Thompson. She has the coolest, funkiest little plant shop. I called Amanda, and it's called Aster Gardens. Called Amanda a couple days ago, and I said, hey, I need a nice sized Staghorn Fern. I don't want a dinky one. And she's like, oh, I think I still have one. And she went into a back room somewhere and she found it. And this is the one she found for me, which is exactly what I wanted. If I can get this out, holy cow. I think the hardest part of this is going to be getting this thing out of the container. Ah, success. So I'm going to take some of this soil off because I don't need all of this, but I also want to make sure I'm not damaging the plant. So I took about half of the soil off of the root ball. Now I need to determine which way is up because there's a right way to mount this and a wrong way. And you want to look at the base. So these fronds here are the shield fronds, these flat pieces, and these will eventually grow over and cover up the root ball. They're really cool. It's an awesome plant. So what I'm looking for is the new growth coming out of the center of these. And so I've got one, I don't know how well you can see, there's a little bit coming out in here. So that is up. That new growth is going to come up, and then spill over. So I am going to mount that. It's kind of hard, it's a big one. I'm going to mount it like this. So that's going to be up because, especially with this larger shield frond here, I've got new growth coming out of this. So it'll grow up and then it'll spill over. So it's going to go on the board. Let me move this out of the way. So here's my board, and it's going to go on my board in the center of it like that, so that when it's finally on there, it'll grow properly. When I position the screws, I centered the plant in the middle of it. You can use, if you're really particular about it, I am not overly particular about these kinds of things. I just kind of eyeballed it, found the center point of my cutting board, and then put a screw on each end based on the size of my root ball, because this is where I'm going to use the fishing line to anchor my root ball in place with all the sphagnum moss. So let's start anchoring this in place. Now that I've determined which way is up for my Staghorn Fern, I want to put down a base. So I'm going to use some wood chips. You could also put, I've seen it done with sphagnum moss, but I've also heard that it can be, it can hold too much moisture against the root ball and it doesn't dry out. So I want to make sure that I'm not going to have moisture issues later on. So I'm just doing a little pile of orchid bark. You could also use like coconut coir, but I just felt like orchid bark would be a good thing to use. So that's going to go on the center. And then I'll position my staghorn on that. I forgot to mention too that some floral wire or bonsai wire is really helpful for helping you anchor the plant in place before you start packing the sphagnum moss around it. So I've got my floral wire, and I'm just going to use a bit of it to tie it between the two. I'm going to fish it between the fronds here. I don't want to damage the shield fronds at all. I'm just going to run this through, and then I'm going to use this as a way to anchor it. So I'm just going to wrap it around each end. That. There, and then it holds it in place so I can start packing all of my sphagnum moss in place. And the sphagnum moss I've had soaking for a little while, so it's nice and saturated. And that's what you're going to use to start packing it in. And I'm only going to do one part at a time because trying to do all the sphagnum moss all the way around it right away is very difficult to do. So I'm going to do the bottom portion of it first and get all that sphagnum moss packed in there and around it. And then I'll do the fishing wire, start weaving it between the screws so that I've got a nice mound forming. Now my next step is I'm going to come in with my fishing line and I'm going to tie a knot or make a loop around the outside screw here. And you're simply going to start weaving it back and forth so that you're really focusing on getting that sphagnum, holding that sphagnum moss in place. And the cool thing about this is eventually this, as it does in the wild, it will attach onto your board. And this is just kind of to start that process. And then I'll tie this off. And now you're going to repeat the same thing on the other side of the board and start packing in sphagnum moss on this side. It's tight quarters here, it's a little difficult to see. You could also mount this to driftwood or a piece of cork or piece of wood, tree wood, whatever you've got, can be mounted to just about anything. And now we're just going to repeat the weaving back and forth between the two screws on the sides of the board. And I'm just making a loop on this end so that I can anchor it to the one side on the screw and then start going back and forth between the two screws. Then to tie it off so that it's anchored, I fish it underneath all the strings against the board, pull it through, and then pull it down and then wrap it again so that it's nice and tight. Then we're going to repeat the process and go from the top screw to the bottom screw so that then the sides are completely anchored in as well. And I want to make sure that I'm not digging into those shield fronds. And then instead of tying this one off, I'm just going to come around the back side of it. Let me flip this here. And start anchoring the other side as well. Now, the true test will be lifting this up to see if it holds. And it does. Look at that. Isn't that gorgeous? I love it. And eventually, these shield fronds here will grow over this entire sphagnum moss mass, and it'll be covered, and it's really a beautiful look. Care on your staghorn fern or epiphytic plants in general is really, really simple. They like moisture, but you don't want them soaking. I mean, you want to give them a good dunk, maybe in the tub, or hose them off. But you also want to make sure that after they've had their dunk, you don't want moisture sitting in the ground. So you don't want to let it just dry like this. You want to kind of give it a good shake. And once this is anchored, I'll display that a little better. But you want to kind of shake it out and then go and hang it again. And fertilizing once a month, I use and I'll link to all this in the description, I use a fertilizer for epiphytic plants, and it's just a spray fertilizer. I do that once a month. And yeah, really simple thing to do. So I think it turned out pretty nice for my first go at mounting a staghorn fern, and you don't need a whole lot. A nice cutting board from Homegoods or some discount store will do the trick. I think it turned out pretty nice. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.